Tuesday workshop here at the Thinker Growth Community. Had a lot of good things happen this past week, including getting John and Kirk onto the LinkedIn Live talking about partnerships. And then Ryan has been exploring his own matters of partnership. And so we were talking yesterday, Paul and I were chatting about what to talk about today.
Partnerships.
And we're like, hey, let's talk about business partnerships and what makes them work. What are the challenges? And maybe from a broader perspective, the way that we partner with people in our lives, how do we bring that into our work, and what can we learn maybe reciprocally from our work professional partnerships to our personal lives? So is that pretty clear, Paul, from what we talked about?
I think so. And I think we nailed down, 4 or 5 sort of broad questions that I think we'll be able to narrow down as we talk through it. But we started out by saying, what do you think really are some of the differences that make a partnership work well? Because I don't know the statistics. I've got to imagine there's probably a lopsided ratio of ones that fail are the majority, whether they fail nasty or they just fail because, poor planning or that kind of thing. And then there's this other chunk of them that succeed that I've got to imagine is considerably smaller. And what details are they careful not to miss, or strategies that they use, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first topic to throw out there and hear what the wisdom of the council.
I can tell my story if you want about my
Go ahead.
Would have been partnership. So I've had this concept that I've been working on for a while, and I had a friend who listened to my concept and very much saw value in it and agreed with my concept. And for a while, we were kind of trying to figure out when my friend would come on to the business with me and help me and support me through a number of ways with regards to making decisions and initiatives and things like that. And then a couple weeks ago, or maybe last week, he decided that he was ready to move forward. So welcomed him with open arms, and then was like, okay, well, let's talk in a couple days. So that those days come, and oddly, I guess, I can kind of sense a little bit of, I don't know, distraction, or maybe there were some other things on my friend's mind in our conversations. And then thinking about it even further, I realized that there were some decisions that needed to be made that may have been complicated with having another person in the room. So Jason was there. I've been wrestling through it with in my head throughout the whole week, and kind of trying to decide what I wanted to do. And it didn't seem like my friend was engaging. And so after talking through it, I realized, you know what, maybe it's not time to have a partner at the stage of my startup. And then at this point, I'm wrestling with how am I going to tell him, and blah, blah, blah. And how am I going to tell him how he's going to take it? And, what if there's conflict there? And then yesterday is when that happened, when I had this conversation. So we talked to each other in the evening at 9:00. And the first thing he says to me is all yeah, I just got done with what I was doing. And then after a couple words, I was like, yeah, you know what? Well, I think the first thing in my head that I want to say was I don't think this is going to work, which would imply that, I don't think that either he's not ready or I'm going to reject him or whatever. But I just went ahead and said, I don't think I'm ready at this stage for a partner. And then the first thing you said, he was great, because I don't think I'm ready for a partner either. I was like, my tuition was right. And so we talked it through, it worked out fine. And I'm moving forward without him currently. Um, that said, I told him, and I think my strategy at this point is to get my business to a point where things are moving, like it's working, like I'm making sales, engaging with customers, things like that. And then at that point, that's when I'll consider when it's time to take in any sort of support, when it's either managerial support or even like investment support. Um, but at where I'm at right now, where I'm still planning phases, working out marketing, logistics, and so forth, I think this is the Lego block house that I want to create for myself before I start adding on like things where I'm going to need other people's help.
I really love how you directly communicated that. I've been I think this is a crucial I feel like it's on topic, the communication element of potential partnerships, because I think a lot of times we feel like it's a good idea, um, theoretically, but then when it comes to execution, I love, Ryan, that you thought through, "Oh, wait, if I say it like this, that's gonna sound like, a rejection altogether." But the way you worded it was very direct
Yeah.
and very, open-ended as well, because it was for right now. You made sure that he knew for right now. It's just not the right time right now, you know? And so it keeps the door open for later on, but it's also very direct of where you're at. And I think when it comes to communication, a lot of times success or failure, whether it's in partnerships or in, I don't know, in a lot of other areas as well, like we can't grow as an entrepreneur, as a person, unless there is direct communication, whether it's feedback or whether it's intention or needs. There needs to be that direct communication, and learning how to do it tactfully sets us up for the most success, I think, when it comes to those connections that we make.
Thanks,
So that
Avery.
was
I
awesome.
I appreciate the feedback. Especially gets complicated when these people are supposed to be, you know, acquaintances, personal acquaintances or friends of yours. And then you're like, how do I break it to this person so they don't feel a certain type of way or offended that this may not happen? And and his case, as well as any other potential partner or investor's case, I want to keep things like may not be today, but it's gonna happen. It'll happen eventually, and maybe you can still be a part of it. Um, Part of my reasoning, though, just to kind of add a little to that was, and I think this can start a topic, was there. I felt like there was a fundamental difference in the way we kind of saw a solution. And I was telling Jason yesterday, like, I'm very much big picture, like broad strokes, like, and super confident about all of it. Like, yeah, totally. We'll just create a website and then start marketing online. No big deal. Like, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. And my potential partner in our initial conversations was like, okay, well, we need to create a budget for this, and we should talk about getting an LLC for that, and where we should get this LLC, blah blah blah. And I'm just like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And then I thought about it, and I was like, well, it's not really compatible with the strategy that I had in mind, considering a lot of these things I don't really need at the moment. What I really need to do is get my product and sell it and figure out like how it sells and pick, before I decide on all these paperwork decisions, in my opinion. And our not only that, but our perspective on money was a little different as well. With regards to me, I kind of see the money as like energy. Like if you focus on it in certain ways or even let it happen certain ways, if you put the intention out there, um, and work towards it, it'll come to you. And I feel like that's always happened for me. Um, my friend's perspective is a little different. So I could already feel that there was that, assuming that we had gone forward here, there would be a lot of restrictions or stricter guidelines that I was operating in. And so that was also a big factor in my decision making as well, as whether or not we would be able to work together with the way we kind of view our perspectives on business in general. And, it worked out definitely. And thanking again, Naomi, for that compliment, because as we're talking, I was just like, how do I break it to him? I was like, how do I do this without him hating me? We established a pretty good friendship. So, yeah, it worked out, and I'm more excited for it. And I think it kind of liberated me to a point where I feel like I can make things work and then figure out how I'm going to add to them later.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
Something that kept me back a lot before you and I started, Jason, working on Emissary, was that I'm very I'm mm, increasingly aware of what I don't understand, and also aware that a lot of times disclosing that I don't understand it leaves me open to trusting someone else to do it, but then feeling not this is not like somebody else would do this to me, but feeling as though I've relinquished my say from that point on, which is not a good thing. And so what I've really appreciated as we have worked together to make Emissary into a brand is that even though in many cases, to the point that you could be forgiven for not even consulting me or asking me and just doing something because it would work, and yet that's not how we roll. This is hard stuff to pin down in a contract, right? It's just, and that's why I was so reticent to do it with just anybody. I had to look for the person who was self-aware enough to know that I'm vulnerable in this area and I'm trusting. If I have somebody I have confidence in, and yet I still need to have agency and authority over what we do, because I still it's my brand, right? It's like you and I are working together on it, but it's sort of the same way in the opposite direction with Thinker. That's your brand, so I have influence over it, but I don't have control or positional authority with it. So I would say, like, when it comes to what kind of partnerships work best, the number one thing I would look for would be the kind of curiosity that we're known for here on this show in the community. Meaning, like, when people are uncomfortable or uncertain or um, don't understand things, that we don't just stop at that. We dig into it and say, well, why don't you understand it? Like, what's the background? What's hidden there? What is invisibly steering you away from this? And can we understand it? And can we reach agreement? And if a person lacks the sophistication to go that extra mile to talk through that, then that tells me pretty quickly, if I become a partner with this person, I'm going to get steamrolled, or I'm going to get broadsided by stuff I never saw coming because it wasn't important enough to them to communicate up front, and they just went and did it. I'm like, that doesn't work for me either. So I think in choosing a partner, I think the best kind of partnerships that I've learned about, had any exposure to, are very lengthy conversations that take place under reasonably stable economic conditions where neither partner is desperate. But on the other hand, they're aware that there's only so much they can do on their own. And so they say, I've got to find someone to help me with this, but it can't just be anybody. I've got to find the right person. And if I don't adopt that strategy, and if I'm not willing to slow roll it through that until we find agreement, it's a fool's errand.
Yeah. So the word you brought up was agency. So I was writing this idea of agency, and it's a fundamental human need, but it's also, I think, what rocks partnerships a lot of times, because agency is all about boundaries. Where do I end and where do you begin? And where does my stuff end and where does your stuff begin? And if there's a commingling of my efforts, your efforts, time, resources out, decision making that seems to, it might end us up in a different, place than I originally wanted to go. Not only do you need tight boundaries on that, but you need a way to negotiate them. And if that were easy, you know, we would all have perfectly happy and healthy relationships all throughout our life forever. But it's not, and particularly when we get to these partnerships, like you talk about, many times partnerships are formed because we have in my experience at least, we have a initial draw, kind of like the courtship period. We're both excited about this opportunity, so we just like, hey, we should start a business, having no understanding of that person's work ethic, their methods, what roles they generally fill. Um, I'm thinking about time, money, skill sets as investment vehicles. Some people bring in a lot of time, but no skill. Some people bring in money, no time. And then communication. How do you celebrate? How do you cooperate? And how do you manage conflict? And
Yeah.
until you know that about an individual, then you don't know you don't know who you're encountering until you get to that moment in that partnership. And then you better have really good boundaries on that. Because as we've all experienced our even our romantic lives, it takes a while to get to know a person. And the same way a person presents in their personal life is a lot of times the way they're going to present in their professional life as well. Only you're going to have a lot of things hidden. You're not going to know quite so much about who you're getting into business with.
Yeah. And so anybody who lacks lacks self-awareness, lacks the maturity, lacks the courage to be vulnerable and own things where they've messed up. And I think this is even harder when money is being made already, right? I think it's like if you're getting applause from the marketplace for what you currently do, humanly speaking, you have every reason to say, who's going to tell me what to do? I make the moolah, right? So to find someone who's in that position, who can easily push buttons and make money, yet they remain unattached to that, or, you know, they've learned the hard way that just because you can push buttons and make money is still not enough, right? It's like it doesn't scratch the itch. You're going to end up at the top of that mountain and say, now what? And, by then it may be too late. You may have made some sacrifices you didn't want to make. Well, somebody who's been through that and has vowed never again is my kind of person. But somebody who's going through it, learning from it, nope, don't want anything to do with them.
I think one of the big questions to ask is, why do you want a partner? And be very clear. Because if it's, I want a partner because I don't want to be alone, that's very different than I want a partner because I need a bunch of cash. Those are way different conversations.
Yep.
And you need different individuals. So be very clear on what it is that you intend to get from a partnership.
And you want it to be balanced. I think that's one of the big things about choosing a partner, whether it's in life or in business. You want to make sure that you're independent enough to do okay on your own, because you don't want to be reliant on somebody else. But you want it to be a very beneficial relationship. Like with what Paul was saying, I love how you said you don't want anyone who's desperate. You can't have someone who's desperate, but you do want somebody who's excited for it. You do want somebody who has that excitement and that motivation similarly to what you have. And I think when picking a partner, I love this idea of you need to be picky. You need to be choosy about who it is and how you work together and how you manage those difficult conversations. Um, but I think finding that how to stand on your own and doing okay on your own and knowing how to manage on your own and knowing the things that would be beneficial and would add to what you already have, I think that would go a long way too, because then you're not reliant, but you are edified.
I think that's the key. Additive. Is the relationship additive in a way that warrants a partnership? And a partnership is too, I think part of it is the partnership. The word partnership is a little bit too loosely bandied about because a partnership could be a particular way of investing. It's investment and compensation, but you call it a partnership. Like
Mm.
Paul, the way you and I work together is sort of investment compensation. It's not technically partnership. You
Yeah.
own emissary. I don't own anything.
Yeah.
The however, I've been in partnerships where we owned something 50-50, and the investment and the compensation was the same, but the investment was different. The skill sets were massively different. At the outset of I can think of my first, let's say, partnership, e-commerce company. That company would never have existed had it not been for my skill sets. Not
Hmm.
possible. And what I accomplished in a month in terms of programming was significant. And what my business partner did is he did a lot of data entry. I could have done data entry too. So the skill sets and the time investment were massively imbalanced initially. And yet, at the time, he began getting compensated out of the organization prior to me because I had a full-time job. And he decided that he was going to leave that job and he had a little more flexibility. And so he started getting paid from our company before I did. So there was a lot of imbalance to work through initially. At the end, or kind of in the middle, it was like, well, we're both going to collect our dividends out of this and we're going to get paid the same and yada yada. And one of the fundamental things that sort of rocked our boat was there was a time when we were going head to head on decision making. And he came from a particular background where you couldn't say things like Christmas or 4th of July or birthdays. You had to call them holidays or pretend they didn't exist. And and I was like, hey, we're doing a 4th of July sale. And I put the banners up on the site because I managed the entire website. I did all the programming. I did all the graphic design. I did all of those operational things. And he got super angry with me. He was like, nope, you got to take down. You can't say we're doing anything about the 4th of July. And I was like, that's stupid. And so we came to a disagreement, a heated argument over email, to the point where he said, well, listen, you know what I really care about is ownership. So, an easy way to solve this is you just let me have ownership of the company and you sell me 1%. You can take 49%, I'll take 50%, and then I can make the decisions and you can just do what I tell you to do. And I was like, wait a second, that's not what I care about. And so I stonewalled on that because I needed to have a better working relationship, because in my view of the world, if the fundamental working relationship doesn't work, if I can't trust you, then it doesn't matter how much of this company, I own, you own, where we're headed, what we're doing. It doesn't matter to me because it's just not what I can do with my life. And that eventually dissolved our partnership later, where I could not at all trust him. And I was like, I'm out. And it cost me more money than I could have made, but it made me a happier individual. So you got to figure out why are you in business? How then that plays out? What do you want out of partnership? What's the investment? What's the compensation you're willing to work with? Be very clear on those things rather than just being like, hey, both have an idea. Let's get a partnership.
Hmm. A lot of these things you're pointing to, Jason, are part of the subset of questions that I came up with. And I'll just rattle through them real quick because we're already sort of touching on them. But if anybody hears something, and I've got a couple of thoughts about this as well. How do you decide the roles, the equity, the responsibilities? What do you do if things go south or circumstances change? How do you deal with third parties like investors or a board of directors or suppliers, et cetera, and who's doing what? You and I had to have a conversation about that as we were talking about how we were going to build emissary. And I had to I had to say there's really two things that I'm strong on, and then there's stuff that I'm okay on, and then there's stuff that I'm really terrible at. And the two things that I'm strong at are working with the language and going out and acquiring the business, going out and building relationships that lead to opportunities. And so I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the face of it. You know, I have the reputation as the ghostwriter and the editor and all of that. That'll generate some referral business. That'll generate some introductions. And then as that flows through, I will, exercise a degree of editorial oversight on, or directly do it myself depending on the client. But we sort of mapped all that out. And then we said, when it comes to figuring out the strategy for an author, implementing the strategy, we figured out areas where I was good at it, or I had more time for it, or whatever, and you had more time for this and that. And then, for us, it was very simple because we were not entering into joint ownership. We found it pretty simple to just put together a memorandum of understanding that laid that out. But if you're going for a more hands-on split of ownership, number one, I think there's a right time to do that, and I don't think if we were to consider that at some point, I don't think that time is yet. If that was on our radar, I would say once we're booking 3 or 4 new clients a month and busy as all get out and bringing people onto the team and all that then it might be, that would be the time to have a discussion like that. But I think, Ryan, one of the things about doing it before you even have traction is that it's much easier to find agreement there conceptually. But once the rubber hits the road and you figure out what the real logistics of administrating an offer like that is on an ongoing basis, that's when you'll say, gee, I never saw this coming. Versus if you start having that conversation once there's traction, you can point to several tangibles and say, this is how this happens, this is how this happens. Does that appeal to you or does it not? And that's one way that it makes it a little bit easier to parse through who's an ideal partner and who isn't. Anyway, that's my thoughts, but who else has some thoughts around those questions? We'll be editing out this silent moment, by the way. Come on, Naomi. I know your wheels are turning back there.
That's funny. I was
I
talking this whole time.
had no, I had a someone came home and toddler woke up from nap at the same time, and I didn't quite hear, and so I was a little bit distracted, admittedly, Jason, when you were telling me how did you go about with that partner? How did you handle that? How did you set that boundary? How did you set that straight? Like, how did you approach that?
I approached it haphazardly and certainly not as cleanly as I would today. It was emotional conversations that just due to our immaturity, um, I think it led to kind of like the old married couple, like old married couple fights where, all the kids who were just out there doing customer service, trying to have a good day at their jobs and drink coffee and go home to their families, are like, these two guys are arguing. And, if you could, it was palpable instead of just having conversations about it. And a lot of it was because we did not agree fundamentally on ways to operate. We had worked together for maybe a year, a little less, just doing sales calls at the office. We worked together at a different place. He was the sales guy, and I would accompany him because he would make the meetings, but he didn't know how to get anything done. And so because that company was experimenting with this idea of business development, and so he'd develop business, and then I would have to attend those meetings with him because I knew how to get everything done. And then I would go back and interface with the rest of the team and say, okay, here's what we're building. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here's the proposal. Go off, present this proposal. So he was an appointment setter. The he We got along really well because we didn't touch, our lives didn't touch. I didn't know hardly anything about this guy, and he wasn't going to tell me. And so when I tried to develop a friendship a little deeper, things got a little bit weird because we were not going to just be, unless we were working together, we weren't friends. And and um and then as we started working together, I realized that sometimes we make different decisions. The ways we operate are different.
How long so obviously you did end up leaving that partnership. How long from the moment where you realized like that, whoa, wait a minute moment to when that ended? Like with that moment when he's like, well, I'll just, I want to be able to make all those decisions. Like how long between those two times and when did how did that resolve or dissolve? Like how did that like
We
time frame
developed
end?
we developed a rhythm over time of things that I would take care of, things
Okay.
that I would do, things that he would do. And he would get a little persnickety about it, and then I would back down and just find my niche. Or if I really believed in something, I would, speak up about it. But we were both, I mean, we're both at the time we were both highly opinionated, um, and probably not easy to work with. Certainly not for, probably. Uh, and to answer your question about time frame, we started this business in October 2002. Our first knockdown argument, like, I might pull the plug on this, was the summer of 2003. And then it was like,
So a
"Oh,
year later.
interesting. We are, less than a year." Yeah, less than a year. Yeah,
Did If you were to go back, do you think you would have stayed in that partnership as long as you did?
I would stay longer.
Wow.
If I had to go back, what I would do is I'd be like, "Listen, I don't need to be friends with you, and I don't really care for how you manage your life, but here's the boundaries we're gonna draw around this investment, and here's how we're gonna add on new advisors, and we're gonna bring in more decision making, and or I'm out." I'd just be super clear about it now without all the emotion wrapped up into it, because
Right.
the emotion got things out of it, blurred lines. Um, and I would just be super clear.
Believe that. I guess I was under the impression that once that happened, I don't know, I think that should give hope to people looking for a partnership and looking to make things work in a partnership. Like, even like a business can still be successful and there's still a way to make things work and a dynamic work out. Like, when you can understand those differences, when you see that, it doesn't mean that the partnership is bad. It means that you guys can come up with a new system. Because even though, you say you would have stayed longer, if you could go back, you would have stayed longer, but or you would now, like with the knowledge and how you do things now. But like I think it's incredible that even though it was not necessarily the the best dynamic or the most ideal dynamic, you guys still found a way to kind of make it work. And I think that that's the perseverance to get through that from point A to point B. Like, yes, we can be picky and choosy in who we choose, but that doesn't necessarily mean like we might not get it right on the first try. And if we don't get it right, it doesn't necessarily mean that the business will fail. It doesn't
No,
necessarily mean that we can't redirect and find a way to work together, even though.
it's one of the big lessons I took from that was you just got to be very clear about who's doing what and where the lines are drawn. That's it. Got to be super clear about it. That's a great starting point. Beyond that, so then I got into another business partnership with an electrical contracting company, and I knew that I was only going to be there for a couple of years because I knew that it needed my skill sets for a short period of time, after which it was going to become a company that I had no interest in being part of. So it had these lighting upgrades that the utility company was going to pay a significant portion of the investment for any company in the area to upgrade their lights from low efficiency to high efficiency, cutting their energy bills. Um, that was going to be a 2, maybe 3-year run. And then it was over because all the companies were upgraded. After which it becomes electrical contracting, which I'm like, I have nothing to add to this. Super not interested. So I got involved with that organization, funded it, built out technology, got involved in sales, did projections, managed negotiations. I turned that company from nothing into something in moments. While my business partner, who knew everything about lighting and wanted to run guys, contractors, and call the union and get people on the ground and put in all this other stuff, all these things which I had no interest in doing, had no background in doing, didn't care about, just wanted it to work. He did a fantastic job on all of those things. And then once the lighting upgrades kind of went around, kind of petered out, in all of that time frame, there were moments where I was like, well, who is this guy? Like suddenly it was like a Jekyll Hyde sometimes. And I was like, this is weird. And so when I pressed a little bit harder on that, I found out, oh, that's right. He's supposed to be on meds because he's bipolar. And then I found out that my dad has known his mother for 20 years. And some of the stories that he told me about why he had split off from his mother's business were not true. He was manic, and she helped the guy out. So it was all these convoluted things, but I kept on giving the benefit of the doubt, benefit of the doubt, benefit of the doubt. I didn't do my due diligence on why prior to this business things were rocky for him. I just took him at his word because I was hungry to get into business. I was like, I'm ready to do something. So the business was super successful. At sometimes the partnership was just like, I don't even know what's going on with you, dude. And it turned out he needed to be on meds. And when he would take his meds, he was fine, but he didn't want to tell me that. It's like, okay, well, that's a problem. The business was very successful. It did lots and lots of money, and he and I are on fine terms now. But it was kind of like any relationship. You get into this relationship and you're like, wait a second, you never told me you were bipolar. Like, that's
Kind of
meaningful.
important. That's a dynamic that needs to be known.
So
Well,
Yeah.
so let's answer some of these questions. What kind of partners are there?
well,
If
I
there were
really,
3 categories, what categories would they be?
well, I think I was actually just about to that. I love Kate. I like that you said categories because I was just about to say um, with Jason's both those stories there, they did end up being temporary. I think that's one of the things, like there can be long term, there can be temporary, there can be some for like propulsion partnerships, there can be mutually edifying partnerships, there can be um I don't know if I can narrow it down to 3, but there's a few categories offhand.
One is an equity partner. So an equity partner, they are partners in the company by virtue of them holding stock in that company.
Mm.
And you can divvy that up however you want. You can call it an LLC where you can you have a certain number of partners, it's a limited liability company. You can segment who owns what. This whole person owns 10%, this person owns 90%, they both own 50, all the depending on that, how that's structured, there are just certain rules in place. Like if you pay out a dividend to somebody, so let's say you don't really pay out dividends to an LLC, but um, if the company was giving back its profits, it might have to give profits in proportion to the ownership of the company. So we have $1 profit, great. You have to get 50%. You have to get 50% legally because it's your partners. There are tax implications and all sorts of stuff for that, but there's an equity partnership. You own the company in some proportion. There's also this idea of partnerships where it's kind of like law firms, limited partners, where there's the organization and it pays certain things, and the partners invest in and kind of pay some of their expenses out of that. But then they have their own. They do their own things. This lawyer does his own thing. She does her own thing. But they hold a common area and they all contribute towards the secretary, and they've all put some sort of money in as their equity, their ownership, their in the partnership. And then there's really
So they
partners, I
like,
think. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, just to kind of,
Yep.
kind of put a accent on that. So basically what you're doing is you're buying into a business, you're buying into the common use stuff, whether it's the operations and things like that. And then you're taking a profit from that investment. Well, not from the investment, but from the business, depending on like the profit from what the business gets.
Yeah, kind of like if we were all in a big apartment complex, we're sitting on Zoom, but let's say we had a big apartment complex, right? And then we had this common area, and then we all had a roof, and we all had a parking lot, and then we're like, you know what? I'm gonna participate in the ownership of this building because we're also, we also collectively run events together. So I'm gonna pitch in, which means I'm gonna be responsible for making sure that roof gets done, just like you are, versus an employee who's like, well, I don't know, I'm renting the apartment and I hope you guys get that roof taken care of, and I'm leaving next month. So there's it's
HOA is
it's
another good
cooperative. Yeah, it's a cooperative
Oh yeah,
agreement.
analogy.
HOA, cooperative agreement. That's
Yeah.
right.
And then there's investors really who are the typical idea is, you're going to give some sort of cash out there. The partnership part of that I think people would think of it as a partnership. The partnership part of it is, what are they doing or not doing in the business? And typically they're not doing anything. They're going to give you cash and the company's going to do what it does, and then they're going to get cash out of it, sort of as a silent partner. But there's all sorts of ways to slice and dice that. So yeah, that's where I think people need to be clear. Do you really need ownership? You have to divvy up ownership. And is it really a partnership, or is it really just you're divvying up ownership and there's really one person who's in charge of it? Because it's not necessarily a partnership, if one person's making all the decisions. And that's okay. But that's where I think you get into time, money, and skill sets. What do your partners bring to the table? It's time, money, or skill sets. And that's where things get a little bit out of whack. Like the one partnership I was part of, the guy was working like 60, 80 hours a week because he wanted to. And then he got all pissed off because I wasn't going to do that, which he knew up front, but I was also giving it $400,000 cash to fund its operations. It's like, I don't have to work 80 hours a week and I'm not going to. Like, this money didn't appear out of nowhere and the bank's not going to give it to you. So, right, it's time, money, or skill sets. And you just have to agree what's worth it to me.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I put there was, what do you do and how do you structure it if things go south or circumstances change, right? And so, primarily, there are all sorts of products and legal procedures you can do up front You can do a buy-sell agreement, supplement it with life insurance. One thing that I would not want, if I had actual ownership stake partners in my business, is for I suddenly pass away unexpectedly, and now they got to deal with my bride who knows nothing about publishing, right? Not interested in it, doesn't pay attention to it, doesn't understand how it works. But, if I die, she gets everything that I have, right? So part of what she gets is ownership of my business. And now if I had actual ownership partners in it, they got to tango with her. So you do a buy sell agreement ahead of time that says if owner A dies, owner B gets the proceeds of this life insurance policy so he can buy owner A's spouse out of her ownership. She gets a bunch of money, he gets full control of the business, everybody wins. Right. That's a very simplistic way of putting it because there are more complicated, multifaceted situations. But back when I used to hawk insurance products, that was one of the things they encouraged us to do, was to try to find business partners who needed buy sell agreements set up because we could furnish the life insurance policy there. So that's one level of it. But the other level of it, of course, I think, and the most important one, is just being willing to have the conversation, document as appropriate, up front. So, um, Jason, our conversation was very colorful about that one, right? You might tell me to go F myself one, right? And I could do the same to you. And that's true. As well as we get along and as much fun as we have doing what we're doing, life can change, people can change, circumstances can change. And I wouldn't ever want to dream of myself doing something like that. I wouldn't ever want to dream of having it done to me. But we got to face the facts, If we were that consistent, then the lawyers and insurance companies wouldn't have any business, wouldn't make the sales they do. It's precisely because of our nature, our frailty and fragility, and the way we, undulate from being really strong and healthy to being in really bad circumstances. You hope that smooths out and levels out with age, but you never can tell. You don't know how future events are going to impact a person or affect them. And so it's good to have the conversation, and not just once, right? It's good to have the conversation periodically. Is this still good for you? Are you still getting what you were hoping for out of this? Is the arrangement, do we need to update it? Are you tired of it? Right? It's okay if you are. Let's just have an adult, intelligent conversation about, well, then what is the exit strategy? How can I buy you out if you don't want to do this anymore? I think those are all good conversations. Healthy partners in business should have up front and have again and again at appropriate junctures throughout their journey together. And the best time to do it is, as we said at the outset, is when you're not starving, you're not broke, you're not desperate, you're not angry, right? What do they say in therapy? Tired, angry, hungry, and lonely. When none of those factors are involved, that's when you have the conversation. Don't wait till any of those other factors have set in before you start, giving your business partner a tongue lashing.
Yeah. So the three things that stand out in my mind, three major areas to evaluate partnerships are assumptions. So what are your work ethics, your methods, and your roles? You assume that everybody else has the same ethic, fills some of the same roles, has the same methods as you. So figure out your assumptions, work ethics, methods, and roles. Talk about investment. What's the time, money, and skill sets that the individual brings to the table? And then how does communication work? How do you celebrate? How do you cooperate? And how do you manage conflict? You can apply that sort of framework to almost any close interpersonal relationship. You want to get married? Let's talk about ethics, methods, and roles. Let's talk about time, money, and skill sets. Let's talk about celebrations, cooperation, and managing conflict. It's not getting into a partnership is very much the same.
Yep, I agree. I think it's one thing to try to sell your business to somebody, with regards to like how it can work and how it can benefit and things like that. But I also think that it's important to learn about how how that person who you're thinking about bringing into your business is going to work within your business. I think from what I learned in my experience is that, like in any sales, I think if you're in a sales position, this will kind of make sense. But like, it's one thing to like continue to talk about the benefits of what you're doing and how you're solving problems, but it's really important to listen to the other person to see what that person will fit within your business. Also, it's important to listen to that person's needs as well to kind of to learn, what they're looking for in something like this. So, um, yeah, I think where I could have done better in my situation was rather than like really rather than just talking about what I was doing and how excited I was, I also I also could have listened a little bit more um, with regards to like where this person was within their lives and what they were looking for as well. Well, in the end, we kind of both caught it and were able to come to an agreement about things. Um, so we're lucky, but I can only imagine some other businesses out there or entrepreneurs that fell into a trap like this where they want help or they're looking for a partner and then they find someone that they felt like could be their partner. But it just doesn't work out that way because the communication wasn't there. Yeah, it's kind of like you said, it's kind of like getting married or getting in a relationship. You have to like take the time to get to know somebody before taking them on.
I think a real quick example as our time is dwindling here, but most political leaders do the opposite of this once they get into office. But the really good ones live and die by the rule of having rivals in front of you, questioning everything that you want to do in a healthy conflict sense, right? And I think it's the same in business. I think if one of the best things you could say is I need somebody who sees everything I don't see. Not I need, you mentioned earlier about some of the wrong reasons, Naomi. I think one of the best reasons you could want a partner, and one of the things you have to remain open to. And it's easy to say that when everything's going well. It's harder to say it when you're actually being confronted with your own weakness. But Jason, like you confronted me about being reserved. I needed to hear that. And so if I'm going to live up to what I believe about having a team of rivals, then I need to be open to the fact that part of the reason God has brought us together is because you see all the things I don't, or so many of the things I don't. you know? So, um, helpful marriage tip there, by the way, too, especially gentlemen, if you're listening. This is what your wife is for. She sees the things you do not see.
She's not an egg.
Yeah. It sounds like she is, but she's not.
Okay, Naomi.
I thought
Do
Naomi would appreciate
we have a
that part.
counterpoint here?
Yeah. No, I love that. Okay, Paul, I'm actually dealing with a circumstance right now I wholeheartedly believe that I'm in a specific circumstance and there's two people that have stuck out to me to seek advice from in like specifically in like in-depth advice. And one of them I do think would have an opposing perspective from where I'm at in the dynamic. And I value their insight. And so I'm like, I think that's why I'm feeling that prompting. Like I'm feeling like, okay, how do I have this conversation with this person? Because I don't know in depth my circumstances. So I'd have to explain my circumstances, explain the situation, but having that but I do know that they would have, the opposite side of what I need to hear for my growth and for my processing.
And that's how it's done. It's like the best leaders put a rival in their own path consciously and for that purpose. Not someone who's there to sabotage and tear down what they're doing. It's someone who's
Right.
there to question before you go running off at 100 miles an hour to do the wrong thing. So,
Yeah, I like
I
the
mean,
one thing that you added there that really stood out to me, Paul, and Naomi. It sounds like you're dealing with that. Is is in terms of vision. So I mentioned assumptions, investment, communication, but I love this idea of vision. Do you see the same things I see, and do you see the things I don't see? Those two in proportion, because we all have relationships where it's like you see all the things I don't see, but you don't see any things I do. Well, that's not going to work.
yeah,
And also if it's you see all the things I see, but you don't see any things I don't see, it's like I'm missing something here.
Yep.
I
yeah,
don't need you. If we're always going to agree, one of us is
not
irrelevant.
helpful.
Mhm. I was literally thinking about that earlier today. I have someone who's really, really close to me, and I talk to her on almost a daily basis. And I'm like, I was like, this is weird that I'm feeling prompted to talk to two people who I don't talk to very often, that one of which I feel like could tell it to me, like would tell it to me straight regardless. And the other person would have that opposing view. And it's like, well, it's because she and I are on the same wavelength almost 100% of the time. And I don't need a yes person. I need somebody who can give me that opposing perspective because I need to learn in this. I need to learn some patience in it. I need to learn how to navigate this it's a completely different situation from what I've ever dealt with before. And I need to make sure I go about it with tact.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, like we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago, maybe that two primary relationships or two primary things are kind of moments for great personal growth, and one of those is running a business. And so, if you're not prepared to look at yourself, and Brian, I meant you brought it up. You said, here's what I would do differently. You know, and I look back at my stuff too. And Naomi, how long would you stayed there? I would have stayed longer because I would have dealt with it differently. I would have backed out and I would have held it as an investment, but I couldn't figure out how to do that at the time. And now I operate totally differently because I'm not holding on, I think, to some of the things I was holding on to before.
And I really think in being choosy, when it comes to things going wrong and when it comes to choosing a partner, sometimes it's good to choose the partner that does have a dynamic that's more difficult to work with. Not necessarily trying to sabotage yourself, but giving yourself something that um, almost like working out your people skills, and finding a way to have that relational dynamic that will help you in other areas of your life with other partnerships as well as in your personal life.
Ooh, Naomi, I like that, like with the trainer and stuff, because that's a type of partnership as well. But the trainer is there for you to succeed. Like they're going to bring you to that place and kind of show you where you're going. But it's up to you to continue moving forward, right? Like it's kind of like a coach in a way, but someone who's going to kind of get in there with you and show you how, or get things started, set up in the way that for you to kind of move forward with it. Um, that said, like I can see where like that's kind of like a mentorship partner, and I really
Right.
like that. I think that's a cool way to start with regards to like your business, and then I don't know. From my point of view, I feel like again, like for me in my business, getting things kind of like going and up and running before looking for support or a partner is important. Simply because to the point that we've all made in this conversation is like not being thirsty or not being desperate, or finding your place in a good level place to find that partnership will put you in a good position to find the right partner.
If
Yeah.
you want to get better at doing something, play it against somebody who's better than you. right? When I wanted to improve as a racquetball player, I actually ended up winning a level 3 championship in my local health club.
Wow.
I played against guys who were better than me all the time because I saw how they moved and I saw how they served and I saw how they returned things. And then when it was time to me to play against my peers, it was one of the greatest competitions I've ever been in because we were pretty evenly matched, but I had just a little bit of edge because think it was partially because I spent so much time playing guys who were better than me.
Oh yeah. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Is that what they say?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They say.
Yeah.
Well, we are at our hour for the growth community workshop call this week. This is a really, I think, timely and important conversation because this has been circling around in the community. Brian, you're just dealing with this stuff interpersonally, on the personal side of things. We all have our own partnerships that we're working through. And we can all, I appreciate you guys as faculty members in the community as well, because not only are you my friends, but you add context and experience and expertise in these areas. And I think I know it makes me better. And I appreciate y'all being here for our members as well. So anyhow, this is the workshop call. It happens every Tuesday at 10 a.m. And then also catch us live periodically on LinkedIn. So if you want to be an entrepreneur and you got a product, service, or message you think is going to change the world, why don't you get better at doing that in the Thinker Growth community? Thanks, everybody. If you need anybody, hey, guys, if you need to talk you through anything, call one another, call me, whatever. And look forward to chat with you guys soon.
Peace.
Bye.
Thank you.